They didn't choose you because you were weak. They chose you because you were strong, so strong that they thought you could handle being broken, manipulated, gaslit, and discarded. But what they didn't realize is that God had placed you there not to be destroyed, but to be deployed. You see, some of the battles you've been through weren't punishment, they were assignments. When God wants to prepare a warrior, he doesn't send them into comfort. He sends them into chaos. And if you found yourself in the life of a narcissist, entangled in their web of confusion, always trying to prove your worth, constantly questioning your reality, it wasn't by accident. It was divine strategy. The narcissist didn't see your soul, they saw your supply. But God saw your strength. God knew that if you could endure the crushing, the confusion, the betrayal, and the lies, he could trust you with a greater purpose. You were placed in the life of that narcissist, not just to survive the storm, but to become the storm breaker. You were the light in their darkness, the calm in their chaos, the compassion in their cruelty. And every time you showed grace when they gave you stone, every time you forgave when they slandered you, every time you stood back up when they tried to bury you, God was sharpening your purpose. It wasn't fair, but it was necessary because you weren't just there to help them. You were there to discover yourself, to come face to face with your boundaries, your value, your inner voice that had been silenced for far too long. That relationship wasn't the end of you. It was the beginning of who you were always meant to be. God allows narcissists into the lives of the strong because the strong have something the narcissist doesn't: a heart, a conscience, empathy. And sometimes it takes standing in the presence of evil to realize how much goodness God has already placed inside of you. You didn't walk away from that relationship the same person. You walked away wiser, louder, clearer, maybe bruised, yes, maybe broken for a while, but not beaten, because broken crayons still color and broken people still rise. And God doesn't waste pain. Every tear you cried in secret was heard in heaven. Every prayer you whispered at midnight, begging for clarity, strength, or just an escape, God heard it. And the moment you stopped trying to fix them and started healing yourself, heaven celebrated. Because here's the truth they never wanted you to realize. They needed you more than you ever needed them. You were their mirror, the reflection of everything they lacked. That's why they tried to dim your light. That's why they tried to destroy your confidence. They couldn't stand the fact that in the silence of your spirit there was peace. They couldn't possess, but now you see it. You were chosen for your strength, not your weakness. That truth right there is the key that unlocks the entire experience. So many times we ask ourselves, why me? Why did I have to go through that? Why did I attract a narcissist? What did I do wrong? But what if the answer isn't that you were weak or broken, but that you were incredibly strong? What if it wasn't a curse, it was a calling? You weren't placed in the narcissist's life because you were naive or fragile. You were placed there because you carried something powerful within you, something that couldn't be manipulated, something that couldn't be permanently broken. Narcissists are drawn to light. They're drawn to the very thing they lack. They seek people with empathy, with compassion, with the ability to love deeply because they don't know how to generate that kind of love on their own. You were that light. You were the mirror to their emptiness. And that's why they tried so hard to control you. Because when someone doesn't have the capacity to be whole, they will try to siphon it from someone who is. God doesn't send his warriors into easy battles. He sends his strongest into the hardest trenches. When he wants to build something greater in you, he will take you through a process that stretches your faith, tests your identity, and refines your soul. Being in the life of a narcissist wasn't about being punished. It was about being positioned. You didn't get weaker in that relationship. You got wiser. You didn't lose your value. You learned how to protect it. You didn't come out broken. You came out reborn. Think back. How many times did you get knocked down emotionally, only to rise again with more clarity, more strength, more fire? How many nights did you cry out to God, not realizing that in those moments of pain, He was listening and He was preparing something bigger than you could see? God knew what you carried. He knew your heart. He knew that even when you were being disrespected, dismissed, and devalued, you would still choose love. You would still choose faith. That's not weakness. That's unmatched resilience. The narcissist didn't choose you randomly. They saw your power even when you didn't. They sensed your light even when you questioned it. And because they couldn't control that light, they tried to dim it. But what they failed to understand is that God's anointing on your life is not something anyone can touch. Yes, they might have wounded you. Yes, they might have shaken your confidence, but they couldn't take away what God put inside you. You survived not because you had it easy, but because you had purpose. There's something inside you that can't be stolen. That's why you're still standing. That's why you're still breathing. That's why even after all the gaslighting, the manipulation, the blame shifting, you still have the capacity to heal, to grow, and to rise. That's divine strength. That's what God placed in you from the beginning. So when you look back at the storm you went through, don't see yourself as a victim of circumstance. See yourself as a chosen warrior who was strong enough to walk through fire and not be consumed. You were handpicked for that battle because God knew you wouldn't be destroyed, you'd be developed. And that strength you gained, it's going to be the very thing that leads others out of their own darkness. Your survival wasn't just for you, it was for the lives you're going to change, the wisdom you're going to carry, and the peace you'll never again allow anyone to steal. You were chosen, not because you were weak, but because you were strong enough to walk through what others couldn't and come out more powerful than ever. The experience was an assignment, not a punishment. That truth changes everything. When you're in the middle of emotional chaos, when you're constantly doubting yourself, shrinking your identity, and fighting for someone's love that should have been given freely, it can feel like punishment. It can feel like life is against you, like God abandoned you, like you're paying some unseen price. But in reality, you weren't being punished. You were being positioned, trained, refined. That relationship, that situation was a divine classroom. And you were the student learning some of the most critical lessons of your life. You didn't attract a narcissist because you were broken or defective. You were placed in that person's life because you had something to discover. You had growth that needed to happen. You had strength that hadn't yet been revealed. You had wisdom inside you waiting to be pulled to the surface. And sometimes the only way to access those deeper parts of yourself is through fire. God doesn't always shield us from toxic people. Sometimes He places us directly in the eye of the storm so that we can grow beyond our current limits and become the version of ourselves that's necessary for the next season. This assignment wasn't about changing the narcissist. It wasn't about saving them or fixing them or helping them become a better person. That was never your responsibility. The assignment was always about you, your boundaries, your voice, your self-worth, your purpose. God knew you had more to uncover within yourself, and He used the intensity of the relationship to expose it. Every lie they told you forced you to confront your truth. Every time they manipulated your reality, it pushed you closer to God's reality. Every time they made you feel small, you were secretly being pushed into a revelation of how powerful you really are. And think about it. How else would you have discovered that? Would you have developed your voice, your confidence, your ability to discern if everything had been comfortable? Would you have built spiritual muscle if everything had been easy? God doesn't let us waste time. Even the time you spent crying, questioning, and feeling lost was part of the assignment. He was using it. He was watching you build character, resilience, endurance. And while you may have thought you were losing time, you were really gaining clarity. What you endured in that relationship was never meant to become your identity. It was meant to prepare you for your destiny. Some lessons can't be learned in peace. Some strength can only be developed in battle. You didn't sign up for it, but God allowed it because he knew that on the other side of that experience was a version of you that would be unstoppable, untouchable, and unshakable. He knew that you'd come out of it with something powerful, your self-respect, your discernment, your voice, and most of all, your connection to him. This wasn't punishment. Punishment leaves you bitter. This experience is going to leave you better. It was never about tearing you down. It was about tearing off the parts of you that no longer served your calling, the false beliefs, the fear of being alone, the need for external validation. God was burning it all off. And when the smoke cleared, who you really are began to rise. This assignment is going to bless others too. The strength you now have is going to help people who are still stuck in their own confusion. You're not just healing for you, you're becoming a guide, a testimony, a vessel. What looked like the worst thing that ever happened to you is going to become the story that sets others free. That's not punishment. That's purpose. That's divine strategy. That's why you were placed in that fire, because God knew you wouldn't just survive. You'd come out refined, powerful, and ready for everything he has next for you. You were there to discover yourself, not to fix them. That changes the entire narrative. For so long, you thought your role was to love them harder, to be more patient, to understand their trauma, to show up even when they didn't deserve it. You convinced yourself that if you could just be enough, good enough, calm enough, forgiving enough, then maybe they would change. Maybe they would finally see your value. But what you didn't realize was that God never sent you into that situation to fix the narcissist. He sent you there so you could finally see you. There is a deep illusion in toxic relationships, one that makes you feel like the more you give, the more it will heal. But narcissists don't operate in emotional logic. They aren't interested in mutual growth. They're interested in control. And what keeps you bound to them is the belief that if you could just unlock the right formula, the right tone, the right behavior, then they'll wake up and change. But God never told you to save them. He sent you there so you could save yourself. Because in that dark space, you came face to face with your own reflection. You had to ask yourself, why do I keep accepting less than I deserve? Why am I addicted to someone who doesn't honor me? Why am I afraid to let go? Those weren't questions about them. Those were questions about you. And as painful as it was, it forced a confrontation that couldn't have happened in comfort. You were there to meet yourself, not the version of you that was shaped by trauma or past wounds, but the real version. The one God always saw, the one that was hidden beneath the need to please, to fix, to earn love. That relationship was a mirror. It showed you where you had abandoned yourself, where you gave grace to someone else but none to yourself, where you tolerated lies, manipulation, and emotional starvation just to avoid feeling alone. But here's the truth. God had to let you sit in that pain so you would remember your worth. Because no one else can teach you that. No one else can hand you self-respect. That had to come from the inside out. You were never weak for loving them. You were powerful for surviving them. And the discovery God wanted you to make wasn't about how to fix a broken person. It was about how to stop betraying yourself. You had to learn how to set boundaries, how to say no without guilt, how to walk away without shame. You had to realize that your love is a gift, not a tool to be used against you. That your empathy is not a weakness, but a strength that must be guarded. God used that relationship to expose the lies you believed about yourself. Lies that told you love must be earned. Lies that whispered you're only valuable when you're useful. Lies that said your feelings are too much, your needs are inconvenient, your dreams are too big. But the moment you started to wake up, the moment you started to choose yourself over their approval, that was the beginning of your breakthrough. That was when God's true purpose began to unfold. You see, it was never about them. It was always about the you that would emerge from the ashes, the version of you who finally stopped shrinking, the one who started trusting their intuition, the one who found strength in solitude, the one who no longer begs for crumbs of attention, but walks boldly toward peace. That discovery is sacred. It's the very reason you were placed in that situation, not to change someone else, but to finally recognize who you are. And now you know, now you see. You didn't need to fix them. You needed to find you. Your healing is your graduation. That's what this entire journey has been leading to. It was never about revenge, never about making them see what they lost, never about proving your worth to someone who was committed to misunderstanding you. It was about rising up. It was about evolving into the version of yourself that no longer chases validation, no longer doubts your value, and no longer accepts chaos as love. Healing isn't just about feeling better. It's about being reborn. It's the ceremony where God closes the chapter on survival and opens the door to purpose. When you were in the middle of that toxic relationship, you probably couldn't see any light. It felt like a trap, like you were stuck in a cycle of manipulation, confusion, and emotional exhaustion. But even then, even in your lowest moments, healing had already begun. It started in those silent prayers you whispered through tears. It began when you started questioning why it hurt so bad to be near someone who claimed to love you. It began the moment you realized you were losing yourself while trying to hold someone else together. Healing was never a straight line. It was messy. Some days you felt strong, ready to move forward. Other days you questioned your sanity, replayed the past, doubted everything. But even in that chaos, God was at work. He was reordering your mind, rewiring your heart, renewing your spirit. Every time you said no more, every time you chose peace over their chaos, every time you took a step away from what was hurting you, that was healing. That was you crossing into something new. And that's the beauty of it. You didn't need their apology to heal. You didn't need them to acknowledge what they did. You didn't even need closure from them because you got closure from God. He gave you the insight, the strength, and the clarity to understand that what you went through wasn't the end of your story. It was the turning point. It was the moment you stopped begging for love and started learning how to give that love to yourself. The moment you stopped asking why they did what they did and started asking, what am I going to do now that I'm free? Graduation doesn't mean you forget what happened. It means you no longer live there. It means the pain no longer owns you. The past no longer controls you. The triggers no longer paralyze you. You can look back without crumbling. You can speak about it without shame. You can stand tall, knowing that what tried to destroy you only pushed you deeper into your divine purpose. You were never meant to stay stuck in that trauma. You were meant to outgrow it, to rise above it, and to step into a life that reflects who you've become. And now, because you've graduated, everything changes. You see relationships differently. You hear red flags more clearly. You honor your intuition without second guessing it. You've rebuilt your boundaries, and this time they're made of steel, not desperation. You don't let just anyone into your space because now you understand the weight of your presence. That's what healing does. It doesn't just mend wounds. It reshapes you into someone who refuses to settle for anything less than respect, peace, and purpose. You didn't just survive that relationship. You overcame it. You mastered the lesson. You passed the test. And now heaven is handing you the diploma, not a paper certificate, but a deeper identity, a stronger spirit, and a heart that finally knows its worth. That's your graduation. That's your reward. You're no longer fighting for love. You're living in it because you finally learned how to give it to the one person who always needed it most, yourself. God will use your story to liberate others. That's the bigger picture. That's the divine purpose behind every tear, every sleepless night, every moment you questioned your sanity while loving someone who drained you. It wasn't just about surviving. It wasn't just about healing. It was about becoming a living testimony. What you went through wasn't wasted. It was preparation. It was God turning your pain into power, your scars into strategy, and your silence into a voice that could set others free. There are people right now who are exactly where you used to be, confused, broken, afraid to speak up. They're holding on to someone who's emotionally starving them, walking on eggshells just to keep peace, blaming themselves for the chaos they never created. They feel alone. They feel invisible. But that's where your story comes in. That's why God allowed you to walk through the fire, because now you carry the light. You carry wisdom that only comes from experience. You carry compassion that only comes from surviving what almost crushed you. Your story isn't ordinary, it's redemptive. Because not only did you endure the pain, but you allowed it to transform you. You let it deepen your empathy, sharpen your discernment, and fuel your purpose. And now, every time you speak up, every time you share what you've learned, every time you show someone there's life after emotional abuse, you're planting seeds of freedom in someone else's heart. You're proving that it's possible to leave, to heal, to rebuild, and to thrive. Don't have to be a therapist, a preacher, or a motivational speaker to make a difference. All you have to be is real. Your authenticity is the bridge between someone's bondage and their breakthrough. When people hear your story, they're not just hearing about pain, they're hearing about resurrection. They're hearing about a love that was once lost but found again within yourself. And that inspires them to believe that maybe, just maybe, they can reclaim their lives too. It's easy to look at the mess and ask, what was the point? But God never wastes a storm. He's strategic. He's intentional. He knew there would be a moment in time when your voice would be the exact medicine someone else needed. Your story carries weight, not because it was easy, but because it was real. You walked through the valley. You sat in the silence. You endured the gaslighting, the confusion, the emotional void. And now that you've come out on the other side, your journey carries the kind of authority that can't be taught. It has to be lived. And here's the thing. Every time you choose to use your voice, you're doing spiritual warfare. You're disrupting the cycle of shame. You're calling out patterns that have kept people bound for years. You're showing survivors that they're not crazy, that they're not alone, and that they're not weak for wanting more. You're breaking generational silence. You're shifting atmospheres. And that's exactly what the enemy hoped you'd never do. He wanted you to stay silent. He wanted you to believe that your story didn't matter. But God had a different plan. God knew that the very thing that was meant to silence you would become your platform, that your greatest pain would become your greatest tool, that through your honesty, others would find their healing. That's not just powerful, it's holy, it's redemptive, it's purpose-driven. So don't hide your story. Don't downplay what you survived. Share it boldly. Share it knowing that someone's freedom is attached to your obedience. Because when God restores you, he doesn't just do it for you. He does it through you. And your story, just as it is, might be the exact key that unlocks someone else's prison. God trusted you with the weight because he knew you'd turn it into wisdom. That might be hard to accept when you look back at how heavy it all felt. When you remember the nights you cried yourself to sleep, the mornings you woke up dreading another day of pretending everything was okay, the way your soul felt exhausted from trying to hold together something that was always meant to fall apart, you might wonder why God allowed you to carry something so painful. But the truth is, he saw something in you that you hadn't even seen in yourself. He saw strength. He saw resilience. He saw purpose wrapped in pressure. Narcissistic abuse is not just painful. It's disorienting. It leaves you questioning your identity, your memories, your worth. And when you're inside it, it feels like drowning in confusion. But here's the thing. Not everyone could have carried that and come out wiser. Not everyone could have walked through the lies, manipulation, gaslighting, and emotional neglect and still held onto their soul. You did. You made it through. You may have limped out, but you came out holding something that can't be taken. Clarity. God trusted you with that kind of experience because he knew It would awaken you, that it would teach you lessons you couldn't learn in comfort, that it would force you to examine yourself, your patterns, your wounds, and your faith. And through that, you developed wisdom that can't be faked. Not just head knowledge, but heart knowledge, deep lived wisdom. The kind of wisdom that can read energy without words, the kind that can spot manipulation in a smile, the kind that can sit in a room and discern the truth beneath someone's charm. That's not just survival, that's divine discernment. Wisdom comes with a price. It's not given lightly. It's not downloaded in a moment of peace. It's carved into your soul through moments of pain. And God knew that once you walked through that fire, you wouldn't just survive. You'd come out with a deeper understanding of yourself, of people, of the spirit behind actions. He knew that you would take the weight of that experience and turn it into something that could protect your future, guide your relationships, sharpen your instincts, and deepen your dependence on Him. There's a reason why you're more aware now, why you're slower to trust empty words, why you feel things more deeply. It's not because you're broken, it's because you're wiser. You know what it's like to be lied to while being smiled at. You know how it feels to give your all to someone who gives you only confusion in return. And because of that, you now carry insight that makes you powerful, not bitter, not hardened, just wise, clear, grounded. And God will use that wisdom. He didn't let you go through it just to sit on the other side and stay silent. He'll put you in rooms where your story breaks chains. He'll place you near people who are about to make the same mistakes you escaped from, and He'll use you as a voice of reason, a voice of clarity, a living example of what it means to rise. The wisdom you carry now didn't come from a book. It came from surviving what should have crushed you and choosing to heal anyway. So don't resent the weight you had to carry. It was heavy, yes, but it built something holy. It taught you how to walk with your head high, how to trust your gut, how to protect your heart, and how to never again mistake chaos for love. That wisdom is sacred. That wisdom is power. And God gave it to you because He knew you'd carry it with grace